such a full audience. This year, people have been coming out, people are back at the cinema, and the engagement with our special guests, whether film directors, filmmakers, actors, in the pieces are quite extraordinary. So it's really wonderful to see such a full house. I'm Bruni Burris, the curator of the festival, the annual Jewish Film Festival at the Burns. And I'm delighted to share that we have a very special guest here with us tonight. We're going to see the Levy Visit of Monticello, and we have with us Nancy Bookman Hoffman, who grew up in Westchester County and has for more than 60 years been a native of New York City. These are some of the family photos. I'm going to share a little bit more about Nancy. She's going to come out in a few words, then we'll both have a question and answer and discussion afterwards, and she will be more than happy to share with you the names of some of the people you see now on the screen. But it's all part of they're all part of the Levy family. Nancy is the great-granddaughter of Jonas Philip Levy, youngest brother of Uriah Levy, who was the original Levy to purchase Monticello after Thomas Jefferson's passing. And she is the granddaughter of Louis Napoleon Levy, who is the brother of Jefferson Monroe Levy, who some later time after owned Monticello. And you're going to see both of them and hear about both of these people that are related to Nancy in the film tonight and their essential role in restoring and keeping Monticello alive. Nancy, in addition to being related to all of these people, is an accomplished cook who has taught cooking and nutrition to kids around the city. She will later this month be a guest chef at Enoteca Maria on Staten Island. Blessed with 2 children and 3 grandsons, she still lives in Greenwich Village, Brownstone, which she purchased in 1964. I'm sure we all are envious of that. If only we had that foresight. The house that she still lives in Greenwich Village is just a block away from the house in which Louis Napoleon Levy, her grandfather, was born. Please welcome with me Nancy Hoffman.
Hi everyone, I'm so happy you came to see this film. It does have a lot to do with my family, and you've been looking at pictures of me with my mother, and I'm the baby of the family. I'm the baby of all of the grandchildren, and we also have some of my, I'm trying to think what it is, my first cousin's children with us tonight. So the families come to enjoy the film with you. I hope you like it, and I hope at one point you will get to visit Monticello.
Thank you all very much. I look forward to the conversation.
I am as happy nowhere else, and all my wishes end, where I hope my days will end, at Monticello. Thomas Jefferson, 1787.
Monticello is a way to encounter American history. And there's been a history of Jewish involvement at Monticello for decades.
By the 1820s, Jefferson was in poor financial shape.
He didn't have the money to do what we would call preventive maintenance on Monticello. Things were falling apart when he died. Who buys it but this most unlikely person? His name was Uriah Phillips Levy. He came down to Monticello and he purchased it for $2,700.
People could not believe that a Jew owned Monticello and that the mother of the owner was buried there.
During Uriah Levy's tenure at Monticello, he owned around 20 enslaved people. People who believed in religious freedom could also not believe in the liberty of enslaved people.
One of Uriah Levy's nephews took control of Monticello in 1879.
I did not get the feeling of being in the house Thomas Jefferson built and made sacred. Somebody else was taking his place in Monticello, a rank outsider.
Martin Littleton is very anti-Semitic, and a good part of our argument is no Jew should be owning Jefferson's property.
We like to think that anti-Semitism and racism have disappeared, but they haven't.
The Levy family, they venerate Jefferson for his views on religious toleration, and they know that they personally have been subject in various ways to anti-Semitism in the course of their lives.
You have to tell the whole story or it doesn't have credibility. The good, the bad, the ugly. That's part of our heritage. We need to engage, we need to learn from it.
Monticello's preservation and its survival is due to the dedication of the Levy family over 89 years.
The story of the Levies is one of the great stories in American history.
Nancy? I want to share that not only what you heard about at the beginning and her family and her relationship to the Levy family, being one of the last living descendants. I also want to say that last Monday, Nancy came to see the film for the first time with the director, who was here, Stephen Preston, and they were able to meet. And maybe I want to ask to start off, Nancy, what are some of the moments, and whether images or emotions or something that someone says that has stuck with you now, having seen it for the second time in your life?
Well, I think the first thing that made me really take notice was that we had owned that place for 89 years. That was considerable and a shock to me. I didn't realize that. I thought that the vision of Monticello itself is so beautiful, and my memories of it are that it was such a beautiful place. That's shown forth in the film. We've always looked up to Uriah and known stories about him. This is the only story about Uriah. And we also, his brother Jonas was no less colorful, and so it was fun to see him and see the many pictures of him in the film. I thought my first cousin, Harley, who spoke quite a bit, was very eloquent, and my Aunt Frances, who was kind of the spokesperson of the family for years, her mother, was terrific in it. Let's see, let me just say that Jefferson's brother, Louis Napoleon Levy, my grandfather, had 4 daughters. Frances was the oldest, Agnes, Florence, and my mother, Alma. My mother was the youngest. I was the second youngest of the 8 grandchildren of Louis Napoleon Levy. And I don't know whether my first cousin Philip is alive or not. He'd be 98 if he is.
Thank you. And what about when you talk about, and so much in the film, and for Thomas Jefferson and for a lot of his, in restoring and buying and living at Monticello, talks about it, and we talked about this last week with Stephen a bit as well, the physical presence. It's almost its own character, Monticello, and the landscape. And I'm wondering if you remember from being there when you were young, and now looking at it in the film, what kind of emotions and reactions you have?
Well, you know, I cannot forget my emotions as a child. It was such a stupendous place and trip. It really was overwhelming. And I still admire it and look at it with just utmost wide open. It's glorious. It's absolutely glorious. And when we went there, I was going to read a piece to you.
Yes, I think it would be wonderful.
I wrote a little piece about our first visit to Monticello. And it's quick. It's quick. It's not
It's beautiful. And maybe, Nancy, you want to tell us, when was the first time you were told about this history in your own family? Do you remember?
I couldn't possibly tell you. I mean, there are so many stories about our family, and we were told them from very young. And they're all fascinating. I am a 10th generation New Yorker.
Well, that in and of itself says everything.
We came in 1654, before New York was New Amsterdam. And so there are a lot of stories about how we got here. There are wonderful stories.
Well, if you want to read this beautiful story about Monticello.
I'll read this one. In 1940, my mother, sister, and I set out from New York in our station wagon on an Easter holiday to Williamsburg and Monticello with our great friends Ruth Tishman and her daughters Ellen and Jean. Jean and I were 10 years old. Ellen and my sister Pam were both about 14. I think I'll skip Williamsburg with your permission.
You have a good story in Williamsburg. Come on, you have a good story.
The Williamsburg one? Williamsburg with its costumed hosts and hostesses, its cobblestone streets, and houses furnished in period style was a dream come true. We walked in and out of several houses, watched as skilled workmen and women plied old crafts, and listened to tales of how our great country began. The icing on the cake came inside one of the little houses where we spotted Katharine Hepburn wearing long pants, unheard of for a woman in that day and age, in the company of a lady friend. The adults speculated about the relationship. It went over my head at that time. For us kids, it was a first and a huge treat to have been so close to a living, breathing, big movie star. For dinner, we had real Southern fried chicken. Sorry. Light as a feather and not greasy. Virginia ham and biscuits were also on the menu. Always a fussy eater, it was one of the first times that there was so much good food piled on my plate and that I enjoyed eating it. Excited by Williamsburg, we drove on to Monticello. We stopped at the gatehouse at the bottom of the long driveway. An old man came out to see who we were. When he saw my mother behind the wheel, his face lit up and he cried out incredulously, his voice rising as he spoke, "Alma? Alma?" My mother called his name and, with some surprise, nodded her head and affirmed that she was indeed Alma. Mother offered him a ride up to the house. He seemed reticent at first, then said he would have to get permission from up the hill. He got on the phone in the gatehouse and received the okay to accompany us. He was fragile, white-haired, and got into our back seat slowly, with a little fear showing, as if he felt he didn't really belong there. He sat stiffly, hands in his lap. We drove up the hill, and when we arrived, he was allowed to guide us through the house. While he and Mother reminisced, he took us up to the 3rd floor, the closed-off rotunda, where my mother, Her siblings and cousins used to stay when they spent the summer there with their Uncle Jeff, Jefferson Monroe Levy, Uriah Phillips Levy's nephew. To me, it appeared like a vast, open indoor space, flooded with light and an ideal place to play. I could picture us dressing up and putting on plays. My mother seemed like the luckiest little girl in the world to have spent summers there with her family. Unhappily, I've forgotten the man's name who recognized my mother from so long ago. He was obviously part of my great-uncle's staff when she was a visitor. But the astonishing part was that he had not seen my mother since she was a young girl. Here she was, all grown up, behind the wheel of an automobile, yet he knew her immediately, and with obvious affection, called out her name. It was a glorious visit, and one of the best vacations I ever spent, wallowing in America's past, enjoying Virginia's culinary expertise, and being treated so royally at my young age in such a magnificent American mansion that my mother, for several summers, had called home. My mother was Alma Levy Bookman, born in 1901 and died in 1954. She's the youngest girl in the picture of the Levy family with the pony and carriage in front of Monticello in the American Heritage article by Annabelle Prager. The picture of all four girls is with my mother on the pony with the long blonde hair. That's the only time she appeared in this film. But if you were here for the beginning, there were pictures of my mother and her father, and me, and as a mother holding me and my older sister.
Nancy, when did you write this piece?
I wrote it, I think I wrote it in 2019.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing it with us. We would welcome to open it up to the audience for questions or comments. And people will be going around with a microphone. And maybe we can also, while we're waiting for others, Nancy, when did you find out about the making of this film? And was it through your son, or?
Yes.
Do you want to tell a little bit about that?
Just a couple of weeks ago.
You didn't know before a couple of weeks ago? And Nancy's son, and Nancy, Robert, he's here. Yes, right there. They reached out to us at the Jacob Burns when they heard that we were showing the film. And that's when we got to meet Nancy and Robert by email and Zoom. Oh, I thought you knew about the making of the film. No, you didn't know.
I knew nothing about it. No, nothing about the making of it or anything. But we've always been interested in our history and collecting things about it and articles that have been written, photographs, whatever. I'm a collector of all of that. And Robert seems to be even more interested than I.
Robert is an archivist.
Yes.
So very interested in history in the past and images and documents. There's a question in the back, yes?
Yes, I was wondering if any of the portraits were restored back into the home.
I don't know anything about Monticello and whether they have the portraits. I don't think so. I think
there is a portrait that they didn't talk about it in the film, but if you enter the Naval Academy, I think it's the one of the grand entrances to the Naval Academy, there is a huge portrait of Uriah Levy. They mentioned the chapel, but they didn't mention the portrait. But not in Monticello, as far as I know.
And this is Robert, Nancy's son, the archivist.
Mm-hmm.
Robert, Uriah had a statue made of Jefferson,
mm-hmm.
and tried to give it to the United States government, but they wouldn't take it from a Jew. So it lay on the lawn of the White House for 40 years, and It's now in the rotunda of the Capitol.
I mentioned it.
I'm a cousin by marriage right here, Sandy. Nancy, I think people might be interested in how you're going through the journey of becoming a citizen again to Portugal. I found that quite interesting since your family, the Levies, came from there.
Yes, we came from Portugal, and about 4 years ago now, we applied to become Portuguese citizens because the Portuguese have said that if you can prove that you were thrown out because of the Inquisition through your lineage, we will grant you citizenship again. And I just this week received word that I was granted citizenship.
Yes?
In the film, we heard comments by a person named Littleton saying that how it could be owned by a Jew. Is there some inconvenient history among preservation that it had some roots in xenophobia or anti-immigrant sentiment?
No, I don't know anything about it, you know. All I know is that when my son went down to visit Monticello, they couldn't find Rachel's grave. They were looking for it like crazy, couldn't find it. And so his then wife was infuriated and wrote a vehement letter to Monticello, and they changed it. There had been no mention of the Levy family in the tour guides. There was no marker for the grave, and I don't know whether it is currently being talked about, because I haven't been there in a good while. I've been there a few times, but not lately.
I'm going to also pass the microphone right now to Robert, who might have some more to add about that.
I just wanted you have told me about your experiences with anti-Semitism maybe 15, 20 years later after, well, okay, I guess would be the 40s when you were going to school. And you had you want to talk about your head?
Not a lot, but you think it's pertinent. No, I think I was elected to the student government in some way, and I was in history class, I guess, and Miss Burke turned to Leo Cooperschmidt, who was very smart, and whose parents had the Chappaqua Deli, and said, ask something about Israel, and Leo didn't know. And she suddenly turned to me and asked me if I knew anything about it. And I said, I didn't. And I stood waiting outside the classroom for a friend of mine, and everybody who walked out of that classroom said, Nancy, are you Jewish? And then when I tried to bring up one of the kids who was really being terrible and out of place in school, they ripped me from the committee. They had found out I was Jewish.
I think something that comes through in the film not only is the history of the Jewish ownership of Monticello by the Levies, so much absent from history, even from Thomas Jefferson Foundation's history until the 1980s, but also, as we saw so much in the film and with the wonderful, those who are studying there, scholars, and the other history that we never hear about is about the enslaved people in Monticello, and how that history was also weaved in and shown very much how that has not been spoken about, been looked at and really examined, and now it's positive to see that the foundation is opening and talking about regrets and being able to show and speak. As the head of the Thomas Jefferson Foundation said, our history is the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we have to really speak and be accountable for our history to really understand and the history, the now, and to be able to move forward. So I think what Steve Pressman, the director, did beautifully in the film is he incorporated these two histories that have traditionally and historically really, really been marginalized, if even anyone knew about the Levy story, about the enslaved people in Monticello. There is a piece of history and some is known, but not enough, for sure. I think there's a question here and then in the back, yes.
I just wanted to add to that, because I was at Monticello just a few weeks ago, and there is in fact now an entire tour, specialized tour dedicated to the presentation of life of the enslaved people at Monticello. However, there is no mention of the levees still. So there's progress on one hand and not quite on the other.
But the grave is very clearly not marked.
It is marked, but yes.
And they do have the presentation board underneath that.
But
I have seen them, so yeah.
I guess we have to write another letter to them. But that is great to hear that there is really accountability moving forward and now and present. There's another question.
Any book is available or will be available related to that, kind of to incorporate Jews as part of maybe family gathering that will organize the book. I would be first to buy it. And hopefully, the second part of my question is the family. If I would be a family member, I would definitely argue with Monticello Foundation, about restoring the Jewish identity of Monticello. Definitely. Gathering, purposely.
I did address it at one point, and I sent them a whole piece that was read on the film of Jonah Levy's observation of his brother Uriah's property. It was kind of marvelous because he brought so much to bear, carpentry, tonnage from ships. But I don't know. I really haven't kept up with it. By the way, my anti-Semitic occurrence was at Chappaqua and Horace Greeley High School, next town from here.
There's a question over here. Yes, thank you.
I took my son, who happens to be named Jefferson, by the way, to Monticello in 2013, and we're at the ticket booth. I presented a book that my grandmother had given me that said that in memory of my great uncle Uriah, and so they gave us free entry. They gave us a tour of the rotunda where nobody is allowed, and the staff they did make brief mention of the Levy family on the tour, and in the end the staff brought us into a private area and all thanked me for what our family had done to preserve Monticello.
Good.
That was 9 years ago. Yeah.
Richard Winslow, who is my first cousin's son. He's here with us today.
No, that's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing. I think there are more questions right here. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to ask one more question. Did you ever consider a reunion at Monticello? Because I know that the Jefferson did that.
No, I haven't. As a matter of fact, we rarely convene our family, and we just convened over this film. I think all of our living relatives, except for one in Colorado, have been to this film last week and this week. It's been fun.
And that was the last question.
Thank you very much. Something I just wanted to share, watching it many times as curating the film, but watching it again tonight and in the evening and at the end, of seeing all the presidents in this country making their appearance at Monticello. When the image of President Barack Obama comes on screen, it is really quite an emotional and grounded place to be. quite beautiful. So I'm really glad that that was how the part of the film was ended as well.
That way too.
Me too. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.